I would like to welcome for the final fireside chat of the day, John Arrett. He is currently counsel at Lex Politica, and he was formerly at the Federal Trade Commission as Commissioner Medder's Chief of Staff. I would also like to welcome Acting Assistant Attorney General Omeed Assefi. We are delighted to have him here and to have him speak with you all today. So please take it away, gentlemen. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to Aiden for that great introduction and for putting together a great event. It's been really fun to walk through the halls and see so many people I know from a lot of different walks of life. So before working for Commissioner Medder, I was in the Senate with Senator Josh Hawley as well, and he cared a lot about antitrust issues. So it's fantastic to see that there can be a big event that is just focused on America First Antitrust. And there are so many young folks here who are excited about antitrust. And when I was in law school, nobody young under the age of 75 was really interested in antitrust except for Lena Khan. So things have changed a lot, and it's just fantastic to see everybody here for this fantastic event. And Omeed, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you and chat.
I'm glad that the threshold of young person was under 75. As somebody who just turned 38, it's nice to be in that category.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you and to chat about a subject that we both, I think, care a lot about, and that's what an America First vision of antitrust really looks like in this administration. And first things first, congratulations on your new role at DOJ.
Thank you very much.
And that's incredible. It's a tremendously important spot to have somebody that's really strong on these issues, as everybody says, and because these issues are tremendously important, not just for law enforcement, which is tremendously important, but also for our political economy as a whole, as I think the panelists here have done a great job of discussing. Now, the way I see this time today going, this is really going to be a chance for you mostly to share your thoughts about what America First Antitrust at DOJ looks like going forward. And my understanding, though, is that you haven't been an antitrust person your whole life. Is that correct?
Yes, I have to admit that.
Now, you've done a lot of different things. You prosecuted violent crimes as an AUSA. You worked in the Associate Attorney General's office. You were Chief of Staff of DOJ's Civil Rights Division. You worked in the White House Counsel's office. And then you moved to the Antitrust Division. So that's quite a track record. So you probably had a lot of options for where you could go. Why back to antitrust?
Well, I think the most exciting part about going to antitrust was the shift from prosecuting violent crime in Washington, D.C., which I did for 4.5 years, and district court and in superior court was a real passion of mine, and being someone who was in the courtroom every single day and in the grand jury every single day was a fantastic opportunity. When I was in the associate's office working for Claire Murray, it was when Macon Delrahim was the head of the antitrust division, and Andrew Frinch was still the principal deputy. Mike Murray, Claire's husband, was in the antitrust division, and overseeing antitrust gave me a great window into what they do. It seemed very exciting and very meaningful. And so, when I interviewed in the antitrust division in the Washington criminal section in the summer of 2024, the pitch I had, the thesis for why I wanted to join was, I don't think economic harm is any less detrimental to society than violent crime. And actually, in a lot of ways, it's more nefarious. So that was why I was excited to be there. I don't know that my microphone, there it is. It went for a second. But that was why I joined the division, and it's been a really fantastic experience. I think I've been at the department since 2018, so I've been in a lot of different components, and I've said since January of 2025 that the antitrust division is the best division I've ever been in. It has the most talented trial attorneys, the most talented paralegals and staff, and they represent the best of the department, and I feel having been in multiple different components that I have the ability to make that assessment, and it's a great place to be.
Now, that's wonderful. And I love that framing you have of economic harm being just as much of an issue in many ways as violent crime. So, a mugger might take your wallet, but people who violate the antitrust laws are taking a whole lot more money than that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the way that I viewed it is, prosecuting violent crime, there's obviously the threat of physical harm, but there's many ways in which economic crime is more nefarious. It involves very sophisticated actors, and the harm that they wreak on society can linger well beyond that of, physical harm or the threat of physical harm. And that's why I think it's so important to prosecute it and go after it, whether it's civil or criminal. And that's why it's important to show what real deterrence looks like. And that's why we do what we do. But it's very meaningful, and it's something that I think needs to be prioritized, and I think is being prioritized.
That's fantastic. What drew you to public service in the first place? Because I'm sure you could be making a whole lot more elsewhere, but you've chosen to do this and be on the side of the good guys. I guess I can say that.
No, you can definitely say that. Look, I think public service is a really wonderful thing. You get an opportunity to do a lot of the work that you otherwise couldn't do elsewhere. I mean, obviously, if you're at a law firm or other place, you do meaningful work as well. But the ability to sort of give back to your community and connect with witnesses and victims is really empowering. And really to be able to see that, the results that you can get for people. But there's no other way to do a lot of this work than by actually being there and doing it. I just we have a grand jury training for all of our new prosecutors. So we had all of them come to Washington, D.C. It was a 3-day sort of training, and I gave the opening remarks 2 days ago because it's one of my favorite topics. And what I explained to the trial attorneys is the only way you can learn how to do this job is by actually doing it, by being in the grand jury. And it's okay to make mistakes. I mean, being in the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, it's the best U.S. Attorney's Office in America. And the reason is that the entire model is premised on you getting what we consider lower level offenses, but you do them all by yourself. I mean, nobody reviews what you do. You go into court and you make errors, and you make them on lower level cases, and then you never make those errors ever again, right? So my first trial in front of a judge, I failed to identify the defendant in a bit of body-worn camera, and the judge, I'll say respectfully, improperly granted the motion to dismiss for failure to identify the defendant, and it was really painful. I still am sort of pained by it now, 4.5, actually I guess 6 years later. But you never make that mistake ever again. Right? And so that's the model we want to sort of have. I know it's tricky with antitrust offenses because the stakes are so high. There's so much media attention, and there's a lot riding on it. But what I explained to our trial attorneys 2 days ago, and what I've been telling them since I've been in the division in a management role, is I really don't care if you make a mistake. That's the whole point, right? And typically you learn more from failure than you do success. But what I will never be okay with is them failing to act because they're worried to make a mistake. There's I'm a Washington sports fan. I grew up in DC, so that's sort of a pained experience itself. But my best friend in the world is a Lakers fan, and so growing up I was a huge Kobe Bryant fan. And there's a great quote from him. He's commenting at the time about Darren Williams, who was a shooting guard, point guard for the Utah Jazz, and Darren Williams had gone 0 for 8 in a game. And they asked Kobe Bryant about it afterwards, and he said, well, I would never go 0 for 8. I'd rather go 0 for 24 than 0 for 8, because 0 for 8 tells me that you just gave up. And so what I explained to the team is, I don't care if you lose, I don't care if you make a mistake, but you're going to shoot and try and get the result. And that's the only way to learn. So.
That's great. Makes a lot of sense. So now that you're here and kind of at the top of the DOJ antitrust totem pole.
Just kind of. I'm kidding. That was a joke.
What would you say your vision is for America First antitrust policy?
So,
I ask this all the time.
So I mean, look, I think the vision it's the same vision that I think Gail set out in 2025, which is to be laser focused on kitchen table issues, on making sure that the American worker, the American consumer, and American businesses are able to sort of reap the rewards of the free market system. So for businesses, it's about opening up competition and making sure the marketplace isn't tilted against them, that we can open up markets to make sure that there is fierce competition, because that fierce competition will have the trickle-down effect to the people and to the economy. And to make sure that when we're investigating cases that we're concerned about what markets we're in. There's often times where we're in briefings and the market is something that's readily apparent to be something we care about. There's other times where you look at the market and say, I'm not seeing which consumers are going to be harmed. And so what we want to do is identify those areas, whether it's healthcare, whether it's agriculture, whether it's housing. Because what I sort of have been focused on when I was acting AG the first time, when I was the head of the criminal program, and now again is, we have to be laser focused on understanding and explaining who our victims are and how we're going to make their life better through these cases. And I think, especially on the criminal side, right, there's been for some period of time, there have been some losses, whether in labor markets or other places where there was this sort of, reflexive observation that, antitrust can't win this case or that case. But I think what we sort of failed to do on our end is adequately explain to a jury, right, why they should care, who is harmed. And it's challenging because, antitrust has a lot of complexities and economic theories that we really have to not only understand, but be able to really explain. And a lot of these industries are, as someone told me the other day, are purposefully opaque. So we're all trying to understand that, but at its very core, we need to be able to go in front of jurors or people who aren't familiar with this subject matter and explain what's going on, what's the harm, and why they should care. And ultimately, that's the goal of a trial attorney. It's being, a storyteller and making sure that the jurors can trust you, that they believe you, and that ultimately you're, to quote you, the good guy.
Now, as you mentioned this, I was just thinking, when people think about America First Antitrust, they're oftentimes probably thinking about, breaking up big tech or whatever. But what are some sleeper issues that you've come across that people wouldn't necessarily think of as being issues that really affect consumers in this antitrust space, but that are really important that people should be looking at?
It's a really great question. I think and I'm a little biased, obviously, with my criminal background, but the issue area that people sleep on, for what you say, is the procurement collusion strike force and that sort of work we do on the criminal side. I mean, that, Gail used to call it Doge before Doge, which I think is totally accurate, but that is a task force that we stood up in 2019. And there are times where people say, why is this antitrust? Because they're Title 18 offenses, but per, at the time, Deputy Attorney General Rosen's memo, they enlisted the antitrust division to focus on procurement fraud at the state, local, and federal level. And so that work runs the gamut, and it's done by our criminal prosecutors, and it goes, every part of everyday life, whether it's paving, asphalt, school sports, people submitting fraudulent invoices to the federal government. And that to me is so powerful because, everyday people, and this kind of ties back into your point about America First Antitrust, there's a sense that for a lot of people in our country, the American dream is gone, that they don't have the ability to attain it as easily as before. And so what that kind of, and that sort of permeates through all aspects of life, whether it's their school system or the services they expect for the government, the quality of what they get in their everyday life. And, when Congress or state governments or whatnot give money, there's this expectation that it's being done to improve the quality of life of everyday people. And here you have nefarious actors who see opportunities to line their own pockets. And so that's sort of the most, I think, interesting work we do. It's, totally bipartisan. And, the people are, very sophisticated. They adopt false identities. They commit, various counts of associated obstruction while they're ripping off the government. And we love prioritizing that work. It fits very nicely as well with our whistleblower program. So I can't think of anything more American First than that. But it doesn't get as much attention, and that's okay. But I think the onus is on us to sort of bring awareness to it. Many people may not know here that just in January, we had a guilty verdict, 34 felony counts against Jason Butler, who was ripping off the federal government, submitting fraudulent invoices. And, the most interesting thing that people don't know or haven't noticed is that post-conviction, pre-sentencing, the judge stepped him back with no criminal history. I mean, that's pretty remarkable on a, antitrust offense. Now, to be clear, it's Title 18, but I think that's remarkable, and it's kudos to our amazing criminal trial team, our partnership with the Southern District of Florida. But that's really remarkable. On a nonviolent offense, to have somebody step back post-conviction, it's amazing.
Wow, that is incredible. And I love that framing, Doge before Doge. I was always struck when I was at the FTC, how many people who were engaged in these very complicated scams, You would think that if people devoted half of the energy they devote to running their scam to running a lawful business, this would all be way easier for everybody. Well, among those of us who do watch these issues pretty closely, I think it's probably safe to say that in the conservative antitrust world, there's been a lot of discussion about a lot of shakeups lately. And there's been questions, some of them in good faith and some of them not so much in good faith, about what the future looks like for the administration's competition policy kind of going forward from here. And it would be great to hear about how you see this issue. So what do you see as changing at the antitrust division under your leadership?
Well, look, I think what I try to get out into the public space is that I don't wake up in the morning hoping to settle cases. When I was a trial attorney, I didn't want to settle anything. I wanted to try every case to the max. Everybody stay out of my way. I didn't want to hear from my supervisor. I didn't want to hear from defense counsel. I definitely didn't want to hear about anything about appellate concerns. It was me in that courtroom. I own that courtroom, or I suppose I leased it from the judge temporarily, and I loved everything about that experience. I occupy a different role now, and I did when I was the criminal deputy, which is a management role. And you have to adjust your expectations and your attitude because you're entrusted with more than just your individual case. We here, and I have some of my deputies here, Dina Calais and Nicole Serene, and my chief of staff, Sarah Matar, over there, but we're entrusted with a lot, and as you said earlier, very few people, and it's a very distinguished group, minus me, but there are a lot of really great people who have occupied the role of AAG or acting AAG, and it's a profound job, but you're bestowed a lot of responsibility. And so what I think is important for people to understand is that you don't just focus on one case here or there depending on the media attention or what people are saying. You're responsible for implementing a program that seeks justice, and you have to do it across an entire country and even globally. And so a lot goes into that, and I think sometimes, you mentioned bad faith, I didn't say that, but I will say there's times sort of incomplete analysis or reality-free assessments that I don't think really take into account that we're law enforcement professionals, right? Like, we're not here to litigate in the press. We're not here to get into a public back and forth. People can attack me. It's totally fine. It doesn't bother me. But what's important for them to know is the talent of the antitrust division, the staff that are there is remarkable. And there's sort of comments made about the quality of the work we've been able to accomplish, but just in the last month, we filed a conduct case in Ohio Health that was fantastic. We got a settlement recently in Live Nation that is unbelievable, that's historic, that no prior administration has been able to get anything like that. And I've just, I don't follow the news anymore, but my friends, my staff will come show me certain comments here or there. Usually I just laugh. But I will say it's kind of remarkable to hear some of these comments because I don't think it takes into account the actual reality of being a litigator, working with judges. It's easy to put out press statements. Going into a courtroom and making arguments is very different. And we have to do that on behalf of the American people, and we do it with a lot of passion and energy. And the talent of our people, again, I don't care about the public comments, but what the public should know is that they have the best group of people in the antitrust division, and the results they get are extraordinary. I see sometimes there are these comments about the age of enforcement at the federal level is dead. And I told my staff the other day, and I sometimes make these comments and I can see the look on the face, they grimace a little bit and they say, "You're not going to say that, are you?" But it's funny to hear that the age of federal enforcement is dead when the criminal program alone in FY 2025 increased the days of incarceration for antitrust defendants by 1,200% compared to fiscal year 2024. Eddie Lopez, who's sitting in a prison cell for fixing the wages of his nurses, will be in prison for 40 months. It must be news to Eddie Lopez that the age of antitrust enforcement is dead. It must be news to Jason Butler, who's in prison right now, awaiting sentencing. So it would be news to Ohio Health and all the other matters that we plan on bringing very soon. So I think it's important that people take all this into account. On Live Nation, I think generally speaking, The staff were unbelievable and got to go try Live Nation in court. And what I've told them is don't pay attention to the news coverage, because no matter what anybody says, nobody can ever take from you that you went and tried them in court. For the rest of your life, as I told them in New York last Tuesday, you'll always get to say you tried them. And generally, the feedback I've seen falls into three categories, which is critiques from people, A, who have never secured any relief from Live Nation ever. 2, people who secured relief that's much worse than the terms we secured in our settlement. Or 3, people who blessed the merger of Live Nation and Ticketmaster that they now demand that we undo. And the last group is essentially saying, you haven't fixed our mess good enough to our expectations. So I just tell my staff, don't worry about that. What you're doing is a wonderful thing, and it's achieving real results for the American people.
Well, that's great, and I certainly agree. When we were at the FTC, it was always very strange to go online and read commentary from antitrust pundits who will remain nameless about how everyone in the Trump administration was selling out antitrust enforcement. And you're working on this all day long, and you're trying to get the best results that you possibly can. It's like, if we're not doing anything, it's completely news to me here. But as you mentioned, these are arguments that you have to take into court and win in front of a judge. And I think there are people out there who would like the antitrust laws to be like, here's a big red button, it's like break glass in case of big corporations and just bang it and just hope for magic to happen. And that's just not how antitrust laws function, as you're extraordinarily well aware.
Well, I also think, again, just to add on to that, I thought about this morning on my walk to work, that there is this notion that people just want to break stuff. And as much as I do like the Limp Bizkit song "Break Stuff," it's a remarkable bit of commentary, because we have the responsibility to seek justice. I heard a comment the other day that, well, the purpose of trial isn't just to seek, the purpose of trial isn't some of it to have an airing of grievances in the courtroom. And I said, so you're describing basically judicial festivus. So it's just an airing of grievances. I've been at the department for 9 years. The goal is to seek and get justice, not to have an airing of grievances. And so our work is tethered to the complaints we file, to the arguments we make. And I'll just say, when you talk about break stuff, my philosophy is I don't wake up in the morning looking to destroy a company. And I don't wake up in the morning looking to settle. I want to get justice, and that's tied to what we allege in our complaints and the arguments that we make in court. And as I tell companies, I have party meetings every day, and there are times where I feel the need to say, if I wanted to kill your company, right, if that was my goal, it'd be very easy to do. I'd file a complaint, I'd file a press release, and I'd hold a press conference, and you're probably dead. But that's not a responsible thing to do. Right? What you're looking to do is alleviate the harm that exists and then let the free market operate. And so that's what we're going to do under my leadership.
That's great. And I'm glad you mentioned party meetings, because I was going to ask about that. You were quoted in Bloomberg last year as saying that you have, quote, concerns about the level of corporate capture from the antitrust defense bar. And in your words, there's a very clear ease to which the defense bar behaves with the division and thinks they're entitled to outcomes. And that is something that we absolutely saw at the FTC. People would walk in with a lot of bluster, with their experts saying, of course, no consumer harms whatsoever, or making excuses for questionable conduct. And they were trying to get the commissioner and the staff who were sitting there to just bully them into backing off. And that was not a great strategy for them in general. Now, that was last year. Now that you've taken this role, is this a pattern you've still been witnessing over the months since?
It's gotten better. I mean, that ruffled some feathers intentionally. But look, I enjoy meeting the CEOs, the C-suite people. I enjoy the back and forth conversation. We had an addition outside our conference room recently at my direction. We put a framed picture outside the conference room of what we call 3109, which is a framed picture that says, when you walk into this conference room, you recognize and concede that in fiscal year 2025, we approved 99.5% of all mergers submitted for HSR review. And the whole point of that, right, is because typically parties will come in and say, well, you can't do this, you can't block this, and these aren't the priorities of the Trump administration. And this typically comes from people who have never served in the administration, right? I'm in my 6th year, having been a political and a career. And so I think that bit of messaging distills the conversation. And since that sign has been up, nobody comes and makes that argument anymore. Nobody says that I'm Lena Khan because they can't say that because it's 0.5%, right? It shows that generally speaking, if your merger doesn't cause us harm, we want to get out of the way and let the free market operate. And for those areas, again, a very small percentage, but important percentage of matters that we choose to enforce, it's for a very good reason. And I think the ease to which the antitrust the defense part behaves with the antitrust division has gotten a lot better. I think probably now what I'm more focused on is sending the message that while my leadership team and I are here, we'll meet with anyone. It doesn't mean you're going to get your outcome. It doesn't mean you're going to get what you want. But for a month now, right, roughly since I've been back in this role, we have party meetings every day, and the message is the same: be transparent about the problems. I'll be transparent about our concerns. But me and my staff are going to meet and tell you what our issues are, and it's incumbent on the parties to meet us where we're at. And there's times where I'll have to say, like, I'm just not convinced by this, and you need to know that. But we'll meet with anyone. We'll meet with anyone in the conference room. We'll meet with our teams, and I just expect good faith arguments. And what I mean by that is I expect arguments against interest. I expect people to come in. It's no different than any witness, right, or any credibility test. If you come in and say, it can only be behavioral remedies, but we can't have a monitor, there's nothing for me to do about that. That's a ridiculous thing to say. I mean, recently we met with a party, and we were seeking a settlement and a consent decree, and we're told, well, you could just do a press release. And I just sat there and said, you really think me in my 9th year in the Department of Justice I'd ever accept that? It was rather insulting, but professionally. But that's sort of where we're at, which is we're always happy to meet. We'll take meetings. We'll discuss matters openly with the parties to the extent we can. But my overriding message is they need to be good to my staff. The thing that I hate hearing more than anything, and I was hearing it on a matter today, and then I said, please stop because I have to go give the speaking engagement letter, and I don't want to be so angry. But they need to cooperate with our staff's requests. Our requests will be tailored to what we need and the information we want to understand what the problem is, if there is a problem. And when we're not getting that information, it makes me very angry because then I can't make it a fact-based assessment of the state of affairs. So that's what I would ask people to do.
Yeah, so don't run and ask to speak to the manager. Actually.
Well, and the fact of the matter is, I am happy to take meetings, but I'm not motivated to attend meetings when we're dealing with CID in compliance, right? Like, I'm not going to take that meeting. Why would I?
Right. And one thing the FTC definitely deals with, and I'm sure you as well, is where to allocate a limited amount of law enforcement resources that you have. And I definitely did not appreciate this before I was on the executive branch side of things, just how much those kinds of resource constraints inform the limits of what can be done. So how do you think about those trade-offs and priorities, given your role now?
I mean, it's a really great point that I think is lost on a lot of people, right? Like, bringing cases is not difficult. Litigating cases is difficult. And it's easy to just write press releases and make public comments, but it's very different to go before a judge. It's very different when you have to get, like my staff works so hard, and they work tirelessly to get it right. And they're working all day, they're working on weekends, and they're doing every single thing they can to make sure that their motions are tight, their questioning is great, and they really care to get it right. And so I think what's important to remember is all of that takes time and effort. And they're going up against the biggest law firms in the world who are so well funded, who know these issues well, and we're much smaller by comparison. And so what we need to do is make gut calls about where we can have the best impact where. And there's, of course, trade-offs, right? And there's times where, I'll give you a good example. The 2 best cases I had when I was a trial attorney, I loved them. They were amazing. But then when I became a criminal deputy and I looked around our entire program, those were the first 2 on the chopping block. Do you know how painful that was for me to close those cases? I think only 1 is closed, but that was very painful. That was an unfortunate thing to do because I cared about it so much, but we hadn't made, probably my own fault, we hadn't made the case to the way that we would have wanted. And I need those people working on my staff, working on cases going to trial. dealing with motions. Some trial dates get continued indefinitely. And we have, cases that have been ongoing for a few years now, but we're also interested in bringing our own cases. And so you want to balance those things. And we have great relationships with, Chairman Carr at the FCC, with Andrew at the FTC, and with the state attorney generals. And so in that ecosphere, we're trying to get it right. But there's a lot of work, and we have very little resources, and we're trying to sort of hire more, which is excellent. But it takes a lot. And to go into court, do all that work, I mean, you really need a lot of time and a lot of effort. So,
For sure. Now, we won't get into too many enforcement specifics here, but because this is one of the topics of the conference, I did want to get into one kind of general topic area. A few years ago, I read a book called Just Hierarchy, and this is a book by a couple of professors in China. It is something of an apologetic for how the Chinese Communist Party runs the country, which is kind of a wild thing to read. And that book ends on a weirdly prescient note, because it was written in 2020, but it sees the defining world conflict of our time being a battle about who controls artificial intelligence. And here's the scenario that it sketches in the very last couple of pages. At the end of the day, the book argues, we're going to see an AI controlled by Google or some other tech company against an AI controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And what it really makes the book kind of uncanny is how it foreshadowed the way we talk about our current technological rivalry with China. Because a lot of arguments that we hear today seem to go something like this. We want our American tech companies doing whatever they need to innovate and win so they can compete with China because China's AI labs are getting state backing. Now, AI isn't something like the blockchain, something that naturally tends towards decentralization. I think you can argue that it goes the other direction, in that it relies on access to large data sets and requires large amounts of compute in order to advance. So from a market dynamics perspective, there's a strong tendency towards concentration in that sector. And that's saying nothing of consolidation in places like TSMC and NVIDIA. But maybe as a policy matter, the need for antitrust enforcement in these markets is offset by the national security ramifications. So now that you're at the head of DOJ antitrust, I'd like to hear how you think about this issue. Is there a conflict between promoting American leadership on AI and enforcing our antitrust laws?
I don't think there's conflict, but obviously, AI is rapidly evolving every second of every day. But I think, the goal is to work with our partners across the entire federal government to make sure that we're getting it right. I think, there are times where I've sat in a party meeting and have been told about the need to protect U.S. national security. And I said, well, if I'm not mistaken, I think I'm the only one in this room who's been in a SCIF working on a national security investigation, which is when I was in the White House counsel's office. But I will say, it's important. We care about making sure that American national security is promoted and American companies are able to compete abroad. I think that's true. But that doesn't mean we need to monopolize in America either. And so it's sort of about getting that balance right. And, it's something we work on every day. And that's why it's so important to work with other law enforcement agencies and sort of always be in touch on different aspects. But I don't think it's in conflict. I mean, this doesn't completely address the AI portion of your question, but, we have a lot of national security cases on the criminal side. I mean, we indicted a bunch of individuals and companies who were selling forklifts out of Colorado. The cases in Colorado, but they were selling Chinese forklifts under the guise of being made in America. This was under our procurement collusion strike force. So there are a bunch of cases where we have national security implications, and I think we work really well with our intel agencies and partners, and it's just about sort of being cooperative in that respect.
That's great. Now you mentioned parties coming in and people who've not served in the administration who've, as we used to say, they've learned to speak MAGA, and they can justify the actions they want to take according to appeals to what they perceive as America First or the president's agenda or something. So what would you say to those folks who say that America First antitrust policy means America's companies need to be as big as possible?
Well, I mean, I just reject the premise, but it's interesting because I served in his first administration in the White House counsel's office, representing him on the Mueller probe when he was falsely accused of colluding with Russia to become president. And I remember at the time, we represented in the White House counsel's office the office of the president, but of course the president had private attorneys. And I've explained this anecdote before, where we were going up against a special counsel's office and DOJ at that time, and the president had tried several times to get a big prominent law firm to represent him on the personal side. And there were multiple iterations of the following. On a Friday, I was told law firm X will now come and represent the president. And we said, oh, great. There were times where I had friends at those firms. Oh, we're going to work together. This is so great. We're gonna, because in the past, for example, right, when there was the Bill Clinton investigation and the Starr investigation, the president at that time was represented by both two major law firms, right? And so we were waiting for that for President Trump, and it happened 8 or 9 times. They used to run graphics on the TV about this, that 8 or 9 major law firms at least at various points on a Friday would agree to represent him. And then when I would walk into the office at 7 a.m. on Monday, another partner had said they would quit and they would veto the representation. And then so a lot of these same firms come to me to tell me what the Trump administration's priorities are. And I said, well, it would have been great to have you on board, in 2017 when we were under this threat. So look, people, you don't hold it against them, but it's just worth remembering. People try to speak, to what you say, MAGA, and there's no point in doing it. Just engage on the merits. Don't participate in some performative, inauthentic, disingenuous presentation. Just focus on the merits and let's go from there.
That's great. Now, we've got a lot of folks here from different backgrounds. Some folks are in the administration, some folks are out of it. We probably have people in college or law school here. And there are probably a lot of younger folks who are looking at you and hearing what you have to say and thinking, I would love to do that someday. All this procurement fraud task force stuff sounds amazing. I would love to do Doge before Doge. I would love to put these bad guys away for 40 months.
At least.
Yeah. What advice would you have for them?
My advice would be to ignore the noise about nobody, there are remarks about, the prospect of working at the federal government right now or at the Department of Justice. And what I would say is now is the greatest opportunity to join the Department of Justice. For so long, you had to amass a certain type of profile to be even considered for a job there, right? There were people who would be there for 30 years, 40 years. And the department, through various administrations, have had hiring freezes. I've known so many people who wanted to work at the department, and when there was a hiring freeze or a shutdown or whatever, couldn't, right, over the last 10, 20 years. Now is a great time to join because there's availability and interest in bringing cases. And there's nowhere else in America to do this at the federal level where you join the Department of Justice and can go litigate a case, to get into court, to make arguments. And for people who have never done that, they'll never understand, right? There are a lot of people who call themselves trial attorneys, but if you've never been in front of a jury, how can you really call yourself that, right? If you've never argued a motion in front of a judge, how can you call yourself that? So now is the time to do it, and it would be really great to get in on the ground floor to something really fantastic.
Well, that's fantastic. And with that, I think our time today is probably drawing to a close. So this has been Omeed Assefi, Acting Attorney General of the Antitrust Division at the Department of Justice. Please join me in giving him a warm round of applause.
Thank you.